Hello and good morning to all of you wonderful folks listening in today. As always, very happy to have you. First and foremost, I feel like I need to apologize again for the absolutely shite audio during the latest episode. I hate that I don't know why the playback sounded that way, but it did, and I'm sorry. I was actually pretty excited. I was actually very excited about the episode. And then when I started to edit it and listen to it, a wave of disappointment hit me. But that's life. Today's recording will be much better. On a more positive note, I start my new job tomorrow. Super pumped to have the opportunity to get my foot into the fine dining door. I just hope that I do well. I'm a bit nervous. Any other year, that nervousness would be amplified like crazy. I would be sweating profusely at the thought of starting a new job due to the anxiety I hold. But as I've mentioned before, finally sought help this year after dragging my feet for many years prior, and I couldn't be more grateful. So yes, very excited about tomorrow. But enough about me, moving on. Last episode, we hopped around London following the attacks of the railway killers. The week before, my personal favorite was the unsolved Lake Bodom murders in Finland. And today, I figured we stick with the European theme. And a special thank you to Ranker.com for making this both incredibly easy and a bit difficult. As I search through their website, I'll see one person that I'd love to cover, and then I make the mistake of scrolling down or clicking on another link, and I'll see two more calling my name. After a bit of back and forth, I finally decided on one. But in typical ADHD fashion, I want to share a bit of something else that I came across while immersed in the world of Ranker. I know that someone or a few podcasts have covered multiple of these women in the past, but do you all remember the baby farmers from the 1800s, 1900s? The crazy epidemic of killing babies? It was wild. Both Dagmar Overby from Denmark and Hilda Nilsson from Sweden were convicted of the murders of 17 infants and suspected to have killed as many as 43 babies combined. According to the article, quote, in the late 1880s and early 1900s, a practice called baby farming was common. Due to the stigma of having children out of wedlock, unwed mothers would sometimes pay for someone else to take care of their child covertly. Hilda Nelson was a baby farmer at this time, but actually murdered the infants she was supposed to take care of. She killed the babies by placing them in the washtub, weighing them down with a heavy object, and then leaving the room to let them drown. She would later return to collect the bodies, and while sometimes she buried the babies, she usually burned them. When a woman returned to Nilsson's home to see her baby, Nilsson refused to let her inside, and this prompted the woman to call the police, who discovered evidence of the murders. On June 15, 1917, she was convicted of the murders of 8 infants, although some believe she killed up to 18 and was sentenced to death via guillotine. However, she hung herself in prison prior to the execution. Dagmar Overby, on the other hand, is one of the most notorious serial killers, let alone baby murderers, in Denmark's history. In 1915, she opened an adoption agency that supposedly acted as a go-between for mothers and adoptive families. However, Overby never actually assisted with any adoptions. Instead, after unknowing mothers paid her to find their babies' families, Overby would strangle the infants and then burn their bodies in her stove. Police arrested Dagmar Overby in 1920 after her mother regretted her decision to give her baby up. And when she returned to ask for her child back, Overby said she did not remember the name of the address or the name of the family that had adopted the child. So the mother contacted the police, who discovered the charred remains of multiple babies in Overby's home. Upon her arrest, Dagmar claimed to have killed 16 babies, possibly even starting with her own child, but was only charged and convicted for killing 9 due to a lack of evidence. Some suspect she killed 25 babies over the years. End quote. So, during the same years, only 500 or so kilometers apart, two women were both murdering infants for money or pleasure or whatever motivated them to kill babies. And that's only a small fraction of the many baby farmers turned murderers in action during those years. A wild, wild time in history. Okay, I promise we'll get into the story now. Today, I bring you the tale of a Scottish child snatcher. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from Ranker.com, of course, an article by Zoe A. at The Sun, Murderpedia, Wikipedia, and the free version of an article from the New York Times, because I ain't paying for that. On a beautiful day in July of 1982, 11-year-old Suzanne Maxwell, who lived just across the Scottish border, left her home to enjoy the outdoors and play a few tennis matches. Witnesses remember seeing Susan cross the river to the Scottish side, but only for a moment she disappeared behind some brush and was never seen again. A monster had seemingly been lurking there, waiting for a young victim to cross his path. Maxwell's body was discovered shortly around 250 miles away on the side of a road near central England. Her body showed signs of sexual assault and strangulation, but the exact cause of death is undetermined. Almost 1 year later, on July 8th, 1983, 5-year-old Caroline Hogg went missing. That evening, she had left her home in Edinburgh to play outside for a few minutes, but never returned. Quote, many witnesses reported seeing a scruffy-looking man watching a young girl, believed to be Caroline. They then saw this man holding hands with her in a nearby amusement arcade. Caroline's body was found 10 days later in a ditch in, forgive my pronunciation, Leicestershire, Leicestershire, which was roughly 300 miles away from her home. The cause of death in her case could not be determined due to decomposition, as had been the case with Suzanne Maxwell, but the absence of clothes suggested a sexual motive. End quote. Investigators, although heavily invested in this case and Maxwell's, could never have suspected that a serial killer was at play, just yet. Now for 3 years, nothing happened. The first two cases are getting colder and colder by the day, and police have exhausted the very few leads they did have. But on March 26, 1986, tragedy struck again. 10-year-old Sarah Harper went missing in Leeds after leaving her house to purchase a loaf of bread from the corner store. The last sighting of Sarah was right before she ducked into an alley used as a shortcut. They used the term snicket instead of alley, and I had to look that up. Apparently a snicket is just the area between two buildings, so I used alley. Anyways, again, a monster was awaiting her in this secluded space. Her body was recovered from the River Trent in Nottingham roughly a month later. Sadly, her body had also suffered too much decomposition to determine a cause of death. However, investigators were quick to note something peculiar. Sarah's body, Susan's body, or Suzanne's body, and Caroline's body were all found within about 20 miles of each other. Compound this with the fact that all three victims were young females, and all three victims had been dumped hundreds of miles from where they had been abducted. Investigators were positive at this point that they had a serial killer on their hands. The media placed a great amount of pressure on the police force, with many newspapers comparing these attacks to the Mourn murders. And for those of you who need a quick refresher, like myself, the case of the Mourn murders involved a young couple preying upon young children. According to the New York Times article, In the 1960s, Ian Brady, a 27-year-old stock clerk, and his girlfriend Mira Hindley, a 23-year-old typist, were suspected of killing 5 children. Grisly details of abduction, torture, beatings, and sexual abuse were disclosed in court, turning them into the most hated couple in Britain. So yeah, the police were under a bit of pressure, I'd say. After determining that all 3 of these young girls were victims of a serial killer, the police put together a profile. And this is what investigators initially comprised. Quote, due to the geographical and circumstantial nature of the offenses, the killer was most likely an opportunist. Based upon the day of the week when Maxwell and Hogg had been abducted, which was a Friday, the killer was likely tied to a delivery or production schedule. Following the August 1982 discovery of Maxwell's body, numerous transport firms with links between Scotland and the Midlands of England were contacted, and drivers were questioned about their whereabouts on the date of her abduction. This line of inquiry was repeated following the discovery of Caroline Hogg's body, but in both instances failed to yield results. End quote. After years of hard work, the case finally caught a break in the biggest way. Up until now, police were clueless. They had never stopped working, but they just couldn't get anywhere. Now, in July of 1990, in a small Highland village near Stowe, Scotland, a man named David was in his front lawn one day doing some yard work when he stopped to take a breath and looked up. According to the Sun article, David saw a scruffy man standing next to a parked van. David was willing to give almost anyone the benefit of the doubt, especially in a tight-knit community like theirs. However, this was different. In what felt like a flash, his 6-year-old neighbor Ella skipped past the van before being ruthlessly bundled into the side of the van, which screeched off. Immediately, David reported this to the girl's parents and authorities, who arrived on the scene within minutes. Our guy David here was able to describe the man, his van, and even give them a registration number. As he was giving his statement, purely by chance, good luck, coincidence, or pure timing, the same van that he was just describing to officers started driving in their direction. David started yelling and pointing at the van, screaming, "That's the same one! That's the guy!" A police officer jumped in front of the van, which screeched to a halt, and officers immediately removed the man and handcuffed him. This man turned out to be Robert Black. One of the officers, who just happened to also be the girl's father, swung open the back doors to find a small body tied up in a sleeping bag. He ripped the bag away and found his daughter bound and gagged, but alive. Police threw Black into the cop car and read him his rights. On the way back to the station, Robert Black gave his first of many statements he would give. He said, quote, "It was a rush of blood to the head. I've always liked little girls since I was a lad. I tied her up because I wanted to keep her until I dropped a parcel off. I was going to let her go." End quote. Such garbage. We all know he had no intention of letting her live. The little girl was sadly sexually assaulted in the small window she had been missing, which only further proves that he would have killed her. Upon further inspection of the vehicle itself, much was found, including restraining devices, assorted ropes, sticking plaster, hoods, a Polaroid camera, numerous articles of girls' clothing, a mattress, and a selection of sexual aids. And in his house, a massive collection of child pornography. Horrifying. The following month, Robert Black was convicted of kidnapping and given a life sentence for this crime. Real quick, a brief history of Robert Black's dreadful life. Quote, fostered by foster parents in their 50s, Jack and Margaret Tulip, Black was not a popular child. To his classmates at primary school, Robert, or to them, Smelly Robbie Tulip, is remembered as having been an aggressive and slightly wayward boy, getting involved in petty crime from a young age. As well as the petty violence, Black was also developing a peculiar sexual self-awareness, according to himself, as later confessed to a prison psychologist. Then, his foster mother Margaret died in 1958 when Black was only 11. It was decided that Black would go to a children's home near Falkirk, close to where he was born. It was during Black's time there that his fascination with sex, and particularly with female genitalia, finally drove him across the line from childish experimentation to criminal behavior. End quote. According to Murderpedia, he attempted his first rape at age 12, although at that time I'm sure he didn't even know what the word rape meant. And in the summer of 1962, when he was 15, his time at the children's home was up. Black then got a job as a delivery boy and found a room to rent in a boys' home near Greenock outside Glasgow. He later admitted that while he was doing his delivery rounds, he molested 30 to 40 girls. And for the next decade or two, he would continue to be a huge piece of shit up until his first murder. Long story short, a terrible man, a terrible life. Anywho, during his time in lockup, police continued the 3 previous murder investigations, now with a direct suspect and clear heading. I have to commend the investigators on this one. They did a lot of work to corroborate Black's actions, but eventually they had enough evidence to charge the scumbag. And in the spring of 1984, Black stood trial for the murders of Susan Maxwell, Caroline Hogg, and Sarah Harper. Prosecutors placed him at the scene of each crime through gas receipts or petrol receipts, witness accounts, and other hard evidence. And on May 19th of that year, the jury found Robert Black guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. Police have since asked Black about 9 other young girls' disappearances in and around the area, but he has since denied any involvement. However, it has always been assumed that the actions of Robert Black have affected many more lives than he was found guilty of. Probably a few, if not all of those other 9 girls in that area. And that, my friends, is the story of Scottish serial killer Robert Black, aka the Scottish Snatcher. To be honest, I dubbed him that. I hadn't really seen any other nickname for this guy, and I couldn't just use his name as the title, so I decided on the Scottish Snatcher, because I love me some alliteration. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed today's story. I simply love researching the European, anything European, but these European stories. There's so many different countries and cultures, international agencies and laws and everything in between, everything else that the US lacks. So let me know if you have any international suggestions or hometown suggestions if you're from over there. And once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out of your day to listen to me just ramble on and mess up words. It's always very appreciated. Okie dokie, I must be off now. Bye-bye. Love you.